Welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm Paige Panter, a product manager at Talent Sonar. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 best hiring practices and how to easily implement them using technology. Today we're going to hear from Laura Mather, our founder and CEO here at Talent Sonar. Laura is a technologist that's leading a team of HR thought leaders and seasoned software developers to streamline best hiring practices into an easy solution that improves hiring success. Laura started Talent Sonar after selling her cybersecurity company Silvertail Systems to RSA for hundreds of millions of dollars. Fortune named her one of Fortune's most powerful women entrepreneurs. And at this year's Grace Hopper celebration, Laura will be honored with the AB Award for Technology Entrepreneurship for her innovation in creating Talent Sonar. We're so excited that Laura is using her tech skills to solve a problem that every company faces: how to hire most efficiently for the right fit at every position. Laura, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Paige. I am super excited to share with you all what we've learned about hiring. As you know, hiring is really complicated, and it can make or break your company. The people you hire are essential to executing on your strategy. Throughout my career, I've learned a lot of things about hiring, everything from how to do it really wrong, and lately, how to do things a lot better. So what is it that we know about hiring? It turns out we know a lot. There has been a lot of research around the best practices on hiring. This research comes out of amazing places like Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Duke. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 things you can do to hire better and what that's going to do to help you beat your competition. One of the big questions is hiring actually broken? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. There's a big gap between what we know is the best practices and what people are actually doing today. In fact, there's been a study done by a group called Leadership IQ. This study was conducted over 3 years, and they talked to over 5,000 hiring managers. And what they found is that 46% of hires fail in the first 18 months. That's 46%, it's almost half. And what's worse is that another group estimated that the average cost of a failed hire is at least $26,000. This includes things like the recruiting costs, the training costs, the time to bring people up to speed, the productivity loss. So you can imagine that if you lose 100 employees in a quarter, that's $2.6 million every quarter that you're losing. I want your business to be successful. So let's talk about the 5 best practices that you can do to make sure you're making the very best hires, and how technology can make those best practices super easy to implement. There are many places where the hiring process can fail. First of all, hiring managers aren't always clear on what skills they need, and this can lead to multiple problems throughout the hiring process. Second, when creating a job description, sometimes people create a job description that doesn't attract all of the qualified candidates. And what a catastrophe it is if you miss out on some amazing qualified people just because your job description doesn't encourage them to apply for a job. Next is resume review. In this case, people are looking at resumes, and sometimes they do very quick pattern matches, which means that there may be resumes that are really qualified but are overlooked by your hiring teams. Next, some of the people you hire may have the right skills, but they don't fit the culture of your company. And this is super important in order to be sure you're hiring the very best people. One of the main things that happens is that hiring managers often want to hire someone who they feel really comfortable with or who is similar to them. But oftentimes that means that the person who is most qualified for the job and who is going to perform the best isn't the one who gets hired. So there are dozens of ways that the best candidate doesn't win. I like to think of this as essentially an obstacle course, where at any moment in the hiring process, the best candidate can get blocked from getting the job. So let's talk about this obstacle course. Our mission at Talent Sonar is not just to simply get jobs filled. Our job is to put simple processes in place that help you overcome the obstacles to successful hiring. We want to make sure that the people you hire are the right fit every time, regardless of things like gender or race or what school they went to. In addition, it's really important that these processes are efficient. We know how important it is for you to get the right people in, but to get them in quickly. So we're going to talk about the best practices that are going to help you to achieve all of these goals. Research tells us that the first best practice is to prioritize the job skill sets before you write a job description, before you look at resumes. And what you're going to see is when you prioritize these job skill sets and then carry them through the rest of the hiring process, that's what creates the optimal hiring result. The key takeaway is your hiring team needs to know exactly what skills they want to hire before they go looking for who they want to hire. Research indicates that when teams understand in advance what they're looking for, and then they keep focused on exactly those skills, they end up hiring the right person. But if they forget the skills that are important for the job, what happens is they start to focus on people who they feel comfortable with or who are similar to them. And that means that they're distracted by these things and they might hire someone who is not the ideal candidate. In addition, when you set up these skills ahead of time, you know that the recruiter and the hiring manager are going to be aligned and they're going to understand what each is looking for and going to be able to work as a team to find the very best person. By understanding these skills ahead of time, you can also create a much better job description because your job description can outline exactly the type of person you're looking for. And finally, when the hiring team, the recruiter and the hiring manager talk about the skills necessary for a job ahead of time, the recruiter no longer has to read the mind of the hiring team. They understand exactly what that hiring team is looking for and can be sure that they deliver exactly that. So let's talk about an example of why this is important. There was a study done at Yale about candidates for a police chief role. What the Yale researchers did is they took people off the street and they said, let's pretend that your chief of police quit yesterday, and in this hypothetical situation, I want you to choose a new chief of police. For the study participants, they would show them two resumes. Always one had a female name like Jennifer and one had a male name like Jonathan, and always one of them had great experience and not so great education, and the other one would have great education and not so great experience. But they would mix up the education and the experience across the genders. So what happened? In general, people would choose the resume for the male, for Jonathan. And this is just because throughout our lives, especially in the United States, when we see pictures of police chiefs and when we have a history of who a police chief is, it's often a male. And so our brains automatically go to the fact that it should be a male for the police chief. When asked about why they chose the male resume for the police chief role, they would look at that resume, figure out what the male was better at, maybe it was education, and they would say, well, education is most important for this role, and that's why I chose Jonathan. So essentially their merits would shift based on what the male resume had that was best. This is exactly why we want people to set up the skills that are important for a job ahead of time. What the researchers showed is that if you do that, if you get people to set up the skills ahead of time, then they're more likely to focus on those skills instead of the other pattern matches they can make in the resume, like gender, and they're going to choose the person who is most appropriate for the job. So an example, if someone said that experience in organizing community policing strategies was most important ahead of time, and then saw these two resumes, they would still choose the resume on the left. And it's by prioritizing these job skills that you get protected from somebody choosing someone who they think maybe fits the part as a pattern instead of looking at the actual skills on the resume. So that's why prioritizing job skill sets is so important. When you prioritize job skills, you also want to prioritize company values. In fact, it's been shown that values can be even more important to a hiring decision than skills are. Companies like Google and Amazon and Netflix, these are some of the most successful companies in the world, have learned that if they emphasize matching company values, sometimes even over technical skills, they have much more successful hires. They look at it as skills can be trained, but the values that each individual has is something that's innate within that individual. And if they can hire people who align with their corporate values, they're going to be more successful. And in fact, the research confirms this. There are studies that show when a new hire's values align with the values of the organization, three amazing things happen. The organizational goals get achieved more quickly. Job satisfaction for the entire team goes up. The team likes working with each other. And finally, for you talent acquisition executives, retention goes up. And this is important because it means you're not going to lose the 46% in the first 18 months if you can focus on hiring for values. One of the tricks for this is you need to prioritize your values for each position. Essentially, you need to customize each role and figure out what values align most closely for each role. As an example, for a VP of marketing, passion should be weighted high, innovation is kind of medium to low, and collaboration should be high. In contrast, an administrative assistant, collaboration should be weighted really high, but passion and innovation aren't nearly as important. For a head of research, innovation would be most important, but you probably also need some passion and some collaboration as well. By doing this, it also helps with interviews, because when your team gets to the interview process, they know what values are most important for a role, and they can really focus on those particular values when they're interviewing candidates. And so this can help when you're doing structured interviews, which we're going to talk about in a little while. I do want to pause here. There is a question console in your GoToWebinar console. You can enter questions at any time. We're going to take some time at the end to answer questions, but we'd love, as they come up throughout the webinar, for you to go ahead and enter them so that you don't forget about them. So please do so at any time. The second hiring best practice is to write inclusive job descriptions. You've done a great job prioritizing your job skill sets now, and now you need to be sure that you're going to attract the broadest set of qualified candidates possible. There is an art to writing an effective job description that clearly recruits a qualified candidate that fits your company's culture. As you know, it's important to attract the broadest set of candidates. In fact, the U.S. Bureau of Labor tells us that today, women are 47% of the workforce, and by 2022, minorities will be 40% of the workforce. This means that if your company isn't good at writing inclusive job descriptions, then you're missing out on the majority of the workforce. And we hear all the time that there's a skill set shortage, but if it's your job descriptions that are discouraging certain women and minorities from applying, it may not be that there's a skill set shortage. You're just missing out on these qualified applicants. We know words matter, but consider what happens with words in a job description. Research tells us that masculinely themed words alert women to the possibility that they might not fit within a culture. So let's play a little game. For those of you who are women, just be yourselves, but those of you who are men, imagine that you're a woman. And I'm going to read these job descriptions and close your eyes and hear it from the perspective of a woman. There's one that says, you need strong communication and influencing skills, the ability to perform individually in a competitive environment, and the superior ability to satisfy customers. And then there's another job description that says, proficient oral and written communication skills are needed. You collaborate well in a team environment and are sensitive to client needs and can develop warm client relationships. You can imagine the difference that a woman would feel in hearing these words. And a lot of times I get asked, why is it that something like competitive doesn't resonate with women? Because there are a lot of women out there who are very competitive. It has to do with the way neural pathways get formed from birth. Every time we hear a word, we are looking at some kind of picture or we have some image in our head. And from birth, when we hear words like competitive and strong and best of the best, we are often shown a picture of a white man, whether that's in the media or something our parents are talking about or at school. It's just the way that our neural pathways get formed. And because when we see a picture of a white man and we hear the word competitive, there is a neural pathway formed between that word and that picture. And when we hear that word with that picture a lot, that neural pathway becomes very, very strong. And therefore, when we see certain words like strong and competitive and best of the best, that pathway goes right to a picture of white men. So it isn't that women feel like they're not competitive, it's that the picture that gets created in their mind can be of white men. So in general, research tells us that women are generally more attracted to the description on the right. And if you were pretending to be a woman in this case, you may have experienced that yourself. The key is not that you have to remove all of the red terms that you see on the left. In fact, what the research shows is you just need to balance the red terms with the terms that are known to be inclusive. And by doing this, you can be sure that you're not going to discourage women and minorities from applying to your job, and you're not going to miss out on almost half of the workforce. What we've seen, in fact, is that by balancing the red terms with the green terms, we have also helped to attract Blacks, Latinos, and Latinas as well. In fact, we saw this recently with a pharmaceutical company we're working with. They adjusted their language in their job description to get more female candidates, and they did. But for the first time, they also started to see minority candidates applying, and they were really excited to be able to tap into a new demographic. We also want to keep the requirements in a job description to a minimum. It turns out that women look at a job description and they tend to only apply when they meet almost all of the requirements. Men tend to apply when they meet fewer than all of the requirements. So the fewer requirements you can put in a job description, the more women are going to apply. You just need to remove some of those requirements to preferred, and that will really help. And in general, if you can keep your job description short, that can help as well. I see we're starting to get some questions, so that's fantastic. But please, as you're hearing things, if questions come up, please enter them in the console. So now we've prioritized our job skill sets. We've written this amazing job description that is going to be sure to attract women and minorities and not discourage certain people from applying. The next thing we need to do to make sure that we're doing best practices is identity-blind resume review. Research suggests that identity-blind resume review and comparative evaluation lead to more qualified hires. They're more inclusive of people, and they reduce the people who look the part but aren't qualified. There have been a lot of studies on this, and they're called resume audit studies. They found in general that mainstream names were more employable. For example, when they sent out thousands of resumes to different companies and they only changed the first name, one set was the first name was Jamal, and the other set the first name was Brendan. It turned out Jamal got 50% fewer callbacks than Brendan for the exact same resume. The only thing that was different was the first name on the resume. And in fact, the University of Chicago did a study, and the researchers kept increasing the years of experience that Jamal had in order to see how many more years experience he would need before he would get the same number of callbacks. And it turned out he needed 8 years more experience before he would get the same number of callbacks as Brendan. And what this means is if people are seeing name and they're intuiting gender or race and other things, you may be missing out on getting really great candidates because people may pass over really qualified candidates because of a simple pattern match that your hiring team is doing when they're looking at resumes. This can be prevented by doing an identity blind resume review. In identity blind resume review, we hide things like name and gender and ethnicity. And what's key is this allows the hiring team to focus on the qualifications that are necessary to succeed in the job and not get distracted by things like gender, etc. A real-world example of this is orchestras. Orchestras have increased the number of women musicians from 5% to almost 50% since they started doing blind auditions, essentially auditions behind a curtain. In addition, the number of minorities has gone up as well. So this just shows how critical it can be to do identity blind reviews. Okay, we prioritized the job skill set. We wrote inclusive job descriptions and got amazing candidates to apply. We did identity blind resume reviews so that those amazing candidates could get to the interview moment. A lot of people say, what are we going to do about the interview? That can be one of the most challenging places for us to address hiring difficulties. The key is to conduct structured interviews. In a structured interview, questions are pre-planned in advance, so every candidate is asked the same question and can be scored comparatively. Research finds that structured interviews lead to more consistent and accurate candidate evaluations, and this results in more qualified hires. In fact, what it's found is that structured interviews are 2 times more effective in identifying the most qualified candidate for the job. As one of our sociologists, Liz Kaufman, says, research shows if your company isn't doing structured interviews, you may as well be throwing darts at your top resumes. Structured interviews are absolutely the way to go. And one of the things to focus on in the structured interviews is exploring behavioral values. You need to pre-plan your questions to identify which candidates fit those corporate values. And you want to use your questions to try to uncover how people will act in the situations you're likely to put them in, and identify those candidates who preserve your corporate culture. One final thing on doing structured interviews is they can help with candidate experience. I'm guessing a lot of you have initiatives around candidate experience and improving the experience of the candidate. You can imagine the case where a candidate comes to interview and they're talking to 7 different people, and all 7 of them start the interview with, "So, tell me about your last job." Oh my gosh, that's mind-numbing just thinking about it. With a structured interview, the candidate is asked different questions by each of the different interviewers. The candidate gets a sense of what's important for the role, and they feel like their time has been respected. This is also better for the interviewers. The interviewers walk into the interview, they know exactly what they're supposed to ask, they give really professional interviews, and they have real confidence in whether or not to recommend a candidate for hire. In structured interviews, everyone feels better about the process and that the best person had a fair shot. As an interesting side note, before I reveal the 5th best hiring practice, from the news, you might all be aware of the fact that former Attorney General Eric Holder was tasked with creating best practices for a company you may have heard of called Uber. Uber essentially paid tens of millions of dollars to get experts from around the world to come together and create a report of what the best practices would be on hiring and on things like culture. You can look up the report yourself, but what you'll see is that 3 of Eric Holder's recommendations to Uber are from these 5 best practices: writing inclusive job descriptions, doing identity-blind resume review, and conducting structured interviews. What we're hearing is that organizations are looking at this Holder report and saying, experts have said what the best practices are. We want to implement these as well. And they're using the Holder report as their own recommendations on how to move forward. You can do that too. And the key is this is going to help you find the best person. Uber knows that, Eric Holder's group knows that, and now you can use that to your advantage as well. And it might help you avoid some legal trouble too, but we don't have to get into that today. But the key is you want to find the candidate that's the right fit, that resembles your customers, that's going to be really good for your business. And you don't want to miss out on these amazing candidates that might stumble at one of the obstacles in our obstacle course. So the 5th best practice is data-driven hiring. You've done all these amazing things to get these really great candidates through your process. You've done your structured interview. Now it's important to use data to make your final decision on who to hire. The first thing that's important is to capture the feedback and scores on candidates. By letting people just say, hey, I really love Jim, let's hire Jim, that creates a very unstructured hiring decision. Given you gave a structured interview, you should capture scores for each skill and value, and you should capture the feedback that is given by each of the interviewers. What's key about capturing that feedback is that it creates accountability. When people have to write down their opinions and share them with others, they know that other people are going to see it. And the research shows when you know someone else is going to see your feedback, then you just behave better. So this accountability is really key. Now I want to be clear, feedback should not be shared until everyone has entered their feedback. You don't want someone's feedback to influence someone else, but as soon as someone has entered their feedback, they should be able to see the feedback of everyone else. What this also creates is essentially the wisdom of the group. Because each interviewer is giving their feedback on every candidate before they know other people's feedback, you get this collective knowledge of how well each candidate did, and this helps you to make really great decisions. By creating scores for each interviewer, for each candidate, you know exactly how each candidate did in a very quantified way. So there you have it. These are the 5 best hiring practices. There's been decades of research that tells us again and again that if a company did only these 5 things, you would have fabulous hiring results. You could dramatically improve your hiring success rate and save a lot of money on turnover. We get it. We feel in our bones that these are the right things to do. And they produce awesome hiring results. In fact, we're seeing it with our clients. But let's be honest, they seem pretty hard to implement. So we're going to do a poll, but before we start, I do want to say if you're one of the folks that is using Talent Sonar, you are not eligible to participate. But let's take a survey for those of you not using Talent Sonar. Today, does your company follow these processes? Are you doing 1 to 2 of them, 3 to 4, all of them, or maybe none of these? So let's give a minute for people to enter their feedback on the poll. And while we do that, I do want to remind people that there is a white paper that you can download as part of the collateral. I think it's under handouts, so definitely feel free to download the white paper as we're talking. But if people could enter their votes, that would be fantastic. Give it just a couple more minutes. All right, let's look at the results. So it looks like about 44% are doing 3 to 4 of these, which is really great. And then there's another about 44% that's doing none or 1 to 2. But what's really key with this is that if you're not doing all of them, you could be missing out on really great candidates that at some point in the obstacle course are stumbling. So I really encourage you all to try and look at how to do each of these to make sure that there isn't a place where your amazing candidates are falling out of your hiring pipeline. But let's face it, it's hard to do all 5 of these. There's a lot to do, and training people can be really tough. So our philosophy at Talent Sonar is simple. Let's not try to change people. Let's not try and train them so that they can know how to do this. The very best way to do this is to change the process. Give people a tool that naturally achieves the hiring results we want without having to train them. Now I'm going to turn this presentation over to Paige for a quick demo of how a hiring team would use Talent Sonar. I want you to see how easy it is for a hiring team to execute all of these best practices and not miss out on some amazing candidates. But before Paige gives you a peek at Talent Sonar, I'll ask her to share with you what some of our customers are saying about using Talent Sonar.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was a great overview of the 5 best hiring practices. Yes, we have had the pleasure of working with talent acquisition leaders in both enterprise and mid-sized companies. And here's just a few of the things that they're saying about using Talent Sonar. From Pete Sinclair, CEO of Red Seal, with Talent Sonar, job applications shot up 30%, and the percentage of women in our engineering team has doubled. From Stella Park, HBO's VP of Talent Acquisition, assessing for fit is no longer difficult. The Talent Sonar tool reiterates core principles of identifying a successful candidate through objective measures. And from Health Sherpa's Chief Product Officer, Kat Perez, preparing for interviews can be time-consuming and frustrating, but Talent Sonar's job description and interview question templates have made interviewing that much easier. So let's jump into the demo. Laura said it, making sure you're practicing the 5 best hiring practices can be really tough. But if I have technology like Talent Sonar to guide me through them, it doesn't have to be that hard. When I use Talent Sonar, the first thing I do is define the criteria. Let's say I'm hiring a financial analyst. The system reminds me of skills I've used before for this role: accounting, finance, financial reporting, for example. I also am reinforcing what values I'm looking for in this person. Right off the bat, I want to remember that my company's values are innovation, communication, collaboration, customer focus, and maybe my team's particular personality or this specific role really calls for someone with a value of integrity, for example. And I'm also going to add one more for my team: integrity. And again, defining the criteria up front at the outset before you look at any candidates is the #1 first best hiring practice. It's the most efficient way to hire, gets your whole team on the same page. I can trust that my team is aligned in what we're looking for, and we can actually assess meaningfully on culture fit. And now when I paste my job description in here, I get immediate feedback on what I can do to improve this job description. and ensure that I'm attracting the broadest qualified pool of candidates. Again, our goal here is to not discourage anyone from applying. We want to attract a broad and highly qualified pool of applicants. Here is the feedback that I can see. There's a little bit of room for improvement in this job description. Talent Sonar is flagging words for how inclusive they are or how much they contribute to a less inclusive tone of a job description. And just by making some changes to the words here, I can ensure that I'm attracting diverse and qualified candidates. You can also see that words like ideal candidate is being flagged. Here is an opportunity that instead of describing this candidate as someone who's, perfectly formed and arrives on the job ready to go, we can play up more of a growth mindset ideology and talk about learning and growth once you get here, once you come join our team. So again, here's an opportunity to say, instead you're the ideal candidate, say you are proficient in SQL, or instead of this person will, just you will. It's an opportunity to help that person start imagining themselves at your company. So I'll make a couple more replacements here. And before you know it, I've gotten a balanced tone to my job description, and I'm confident that I'm attracting a qualified and diverse candidate pool. So now that applications have come in, it's time to review resumes. Now remember, our goal at this step is to review each one on its own merit and not be swayed by our image of who we think this person should be. You guys heard from Laura about the police chief study and the critical importance of committing before I see the resumes what matters most for this role. Is education, shouldn't have the most outsized influence on this, on who moves forward, that I'm going to drag it down and give it less importance. And maybe I don't care to score on certifications or location. Now that I've set what's most important for this role, I'm now shown each resume, and here is where you're seeing that identity blinded resume, so that I'm only focusing on the content that tells me I'm measuring this person on their own merit and not being swayed by unconscious bias. So I'm assessing how this resume looks. Maybe experience looks great, maybe on the skills, and great on education. And again, I'm just quickly scoring each of these areas so that at the end, after I've scored all the resumes, I can now see the identifying information for each candidate, and I can also see how they stack against each other, so that when I'm selecting who to move forward for interview round, I'm confident that I've made my decision with a clear-sighted view of their qualifications for what's most important for this role. As Laura described in interviews, our most important goal is making sure that an interviewer asks the same questions to each candidate so that everyone is interviewed equally. Here, I've got some questions assigned to my interview team, to Mike. I can also add questions to Liz by just clicking a question and adding it to her plate. So if Liz is great at customer focus, I'm going to make sure she's focusing on that competency. So that now Liz, maybe that's her second time interviewing and she's feeling a little not confident about it, but she gets a question guide. She knows really clearly what competencies she's focusing on. So I'm going to click Save to distribute these interview plans to my team. And again, when Liz comes in to start her interview, she has a clear plan for what questions she's going to ask. She's reminded of which competencies to focus on assessing Induca on. And she's also reminded of best hiring practices when it comes to the interview. So as the interview goes on, I'm able to transcribe notes about the candidate's general response. And then once I've submitted my notes, Induca's gone, I've gone back to my desk. I submit my notes so that the manager can start reviewing those. And here I can score each competency that I was assigned. So excellent on cash flow management, and really saw these team values come through in this candidate. And as the feedback is submitted, the hiring manager will get all of the results so that they can get them in real time and not have to chase anyone down for interview feedback. And the final interview summary report reinforces all of the competencies and their importance. I also can see summarized all of the interviewers' scores and their scores of each competency, and I can drill down further to see all of their notes. So because, again, our goal is to make a data-driven hiring decision, Talent Sonar has assembled all these data points in front of me so that now that it's decision time, I can look at which candidate scores the highest and make my decision. And I can trust the wisdom of the group on top of that because I can see transparently into how they were assessing on each competency and trust that everyone was interviewed in a comparable, equal manner. So now that we've used all 5 best practices to find the right fit for your company, Laura, let's go back to you for questions.
Fantastic, Paige. Thank you so much for doing that. So as I mentioned before, if you have questions, we're definitely seeing people enter them in the console, which is fantastic. But please continue to enter your questions, and we'll take a few minutes to address those questions. So one of the questions that we have is, does the software fit readily into a client's existing ATS, applicant tracking system? And the answer to that is yes. So we are integrated with Taleo, both Business Edition and Enterprise Edition. We are set up to integrate with other applicant tracking systems as well, and we're working on some of those integrations as well. We have found that by doing an integration, it really simplifies the workflow for folks, especially the recruiters, and it makes for just a really seamless way to be able to interact with Talent Sonar in general. The next question was, is someone in Europe able to use the system? And you absolutely can use the system right now. You can log in and try it for yourself if you would want. And then I encourage you to reach out. We're going to send you a follow-up email, and you're welcome to reply to that. But if you're interested in exploring further, there's an email address here, info@talentsonar.com, where we'd love to hear from you and talk to you about deploying for your organization as well. The next question we have, and definitely if you have other questions, feel free to enter them in the console, is that I think my organization is ready for this, but how do I prepare my team for this kind of change? And that's a really great question, because definitely the way that best practices get implemented, the teams that are doing hiring, the hiring managers and the interviewers, have to change the way they're doing things. Hiring managers and interviewers love to just do a quick pattern match to look for people who are very similar to them, and this is exactly what can get the company in trouble, because it ends up that they hire someone who may not be the best person for the role. And so there is some change management that needs to happen to address the concerns of hiring managers and interviewers. What we have found is things like resume review makes reviewing resumes really straightforward. It's essentially like a video game to score the resumes. And then in doing structured interviews, it makes it so that people have real confidence in the interviews that they're doing. But there is a communication plan that's needed and such, and so we have a group of professional services people who will work with your organization to make sure that we are rolling this out in the way that best fits the culture of your organization, and make sure that it is optimized for the way you all do your business. And then the last question we had is, what kinds of teams are using Talent Sonar today? And I'll tell you that we've got teams from many industries, everything from pharmaceutical to technology to retail to media to advertising. I've been a little bit surprised because There's been a lot of discussion lately about hiring practices in technology specifically, and I thought that that would be the area where we'd have the most interest. But it turns out that across lots of industries, people are realizing that they have been hiring in ways that are not producing the very best teams that they could have. And this is being seen both as super strategic to an organization and also really important competitively. And so we've worked with lots of different types of teams, from creative to technical to security guards to just about anything you can imagine. And it turns out these best practices really just apply across all of the different organizations and all of the different hiring types. They are just general best practices. So it's something that you can be confident is going to really help to create the best outcomes for your team. So Paige, thank you so much for your help with this, and everyone, I appreciate your attention on the webinar. I hope you found it interesting. You're welcome to download the handout, which is the white paper that goes through these best practices. Would love for you all to reach out to info@talentsonar.com so we can have future conversations. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.